Hi, I'm Carole Jurkiewicz. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Public Integrity, and I've been asked to talk today about philosophical frameworks. Philosophical frameworks is a very broad topic, but we're going to be narrowing it down to a few minutes, and those frameworks that are most customarily applied when we're talking about the public sector. When we start talking about philosophical frameworks, the purpose of them is to put a structure of logic and a foundation for discussing topics that can sometimes be very emotional and very passionate. So we give a framework to provide logic behind the discussion. So when we're thinking about ethics, many people think of meta-ethics, which are discussions of what is truth, what is beauty, what is the common good, and those are unanswerable and have been for hundreds of years. So what we normally focus on in this narrow area are normative and non-normative ethics. Now, non-normative ethics talks about, it would be much like an anthropologist would do when he or she is observing a culture, and they would write down what they see as positive and negative behaviors as perceived by the citizens. So we're focusing on normative ethics, and in normative ethics we usually divide it into two categories. One is consequentialism and one is non-consequentialism. Consequentialism, as you may guess from the title, focuses on the consequences of the action. So is something right or wrong? To answer that question, we look at the consequences. And there are different categories and divisions in that area as well. First would be utilitarianism, and that would be looking at if there has been greater good achieved for the greatest number of people, or the least harm for the fewest number. In act utilitarianism, one is supposed to engage in an assessment of the ultimate good for the most people, or the least harm for the few, using actually a mathematical formula. It's not practical to think about every act that you engage in these terms, so rule utilitarianism evolved from that kind of thinking. And basically, it recognizes that there are patterns of right and wrong. Generally, something is wrong. Generally, something is good. It's certainly not a hard and fast rule. But by and large, you can trust on that rather than doing an evaluation on what is good, again, greatest number, least harm for the few. The first category is considered the lowest or least complex category of thinking about consequentialist ethics is egoism, which is actually very common amongst individuals. And that is, when I think about what's right and what is wrong, I'm only thinking about the consequences for me. The greatest good is how it affects me personally. So no matter what I engage in, it could be right or wrong depending on me. When we're talking about something broader than that, we're talking about generally utilitarianism, act and rule utilitarianism, we're thinking about a greater good. So it would be inclusive of people with whom we work, the society in general, our organization, the families of those in our organization, the people affected by the citizens, who are subject to our decisions. So we look at it from that dimension. If we skip over now to the non-consequentialist side, the primary theory there in the framework is deontology. And deontology holds that something is always right with absolutely no exceptions, or always wrong with no exceptions, and that is determined by a thoughtful process one engages in to take in the most complex elements that is possible, and one derives at categorical imperatives. And categorical imperatives, while we don't want to impose our thinking upon others, we wish that we lived in a world that everyone shared our views, and these are called principles. And there's never an exception. So if I think that war is always wrong, for instance, in the public sector, then it's always wrong. It is never okay under any circumstances, ever, ever. If we go back to between these two frameworks, the most common one would be prima facie ethics. And that is considered a bridge, and certainly was developed in response to these two more extreme views. Prima facie ethics states that while generally we hold things that are not principles because we could never violate them, they're stronger than simple rules. They're things that we would only break under exceptional circumstances. Again, we're looking for the greater good, the greater number, but it's combined with principles that we have. We're not willing to die for the principles under prima facie ethics, but they're very important to us and not something we break lightly. Other views that are common when one studies philosophical frameworks as applied to the public sector is the justice view. And very briefly, the justice view says something that's right or something is wrong based upon is everyone treated fairly, no matter what. That would be our primary concern. The rights view takes its impetus from the Bill of Rights, the U.S. Constitution, Bill of Rights, which says that we are concerned about everyone receiving their due civil rights as spelled out in the Bill of Rights. There is virtue ethics, which is another common topic. It's actually Aristotelian ethics. And virtue ethics holds that people in the community would come together and they would agree on the set of values that we should hold and elements of our character that we should have in common. And those would be reinforced through every element of society. They would be reinforced at home, at school, at retailers, with government. Everything that we do would reinforce the same set of agreed upon values. It's less practical in our society today because there are cultural differences, there are situational differences, and there's more conflict because of that and more diversity, where in Aristotle's time, people were not as mobile. The last category that we'll talk about today is one called communitarianism. And it's a relatively new development, and philosophical frameworks change over time. There are new ones developed. And that speaks to the primary justification for something being right or wrong, and is whether it benefits a particular community and gives back to a sense of generativity. So we're thinking about future generations. Is it okay, our actions today, will they be okay for generations to come and for the group as a whole? I hope that you will consider submitting your manuscripts to Public Integrity. We do have a mission for our journal that encompasses all sectors, corruption, NGOs, ethical issues, issues of integrity, social equity, and we warmly welcome your manuscripts that advance the field in theory and also practice. Thank you.